Hello, everybody, and welcome back to ZakIsCinema. Yes, welcome home, everybody. If you're at a point and place in your life right now where you have nobody to talk to about movies, well, buddy, you have found the right place and now you got somebody to talk to about movies, so consider joining here at ZakIsCinema. Today we're going to be reviewing and discussing the movie Scream 2, which came out in 1997. A year after the Woodsboro murders, Sydney tries to move on with her life in college as a new Ghostface killer emerges. On the channel here, we are obviously covering the entire lovely Scream franchise leading up to the Scream 7 coming out in just a couple days here. So if the new one sucks, that's okay because we had a blast talking about all the other pretty good ones. And if it's amazing, then look at that. We got a really solid franchise on our hands here. But without further ado, let's jump into the review for Scream 2, starting with the positives or just the things that I enjoyed most about this movie. Now, with any Scream movie, the opening is always something you want to make sure you're in the theater for. You don't want to be running, grabbing popcorn, busting into the theater midway through because so far, and I hope Scream 7 continues this trend, but especially with Scream 1, now with Scream 2, I really enjoy both of the openings here. Specifically with Scream 2, I really like how the opening doesn't try to recopy the first one or try to outdo it in any way, but instead kind of parodies it just a little bit. It feels smart, self-aware, rather than something desperate trying to top that iconic first movie's opening. I love how the opening kind of really sets the tone with the satirical nature that the movie's going for, specifically with introducing Stab, which is a in-universe Scream movie based off the events of the first one, so it's like Inception levels of meta commentary here, and especially with this second one's opening, it really leans into that satire, not just with the horror genre, but with its own franchise, which is so unique, especially for its time. I love throughout the movie how it comments on fandom, obsession, and how this real-life tragedy kind of gets turned into people's entertainment, which feels even sharper when you kind of go back and revisit this one. And I think creating the Stab movie within its own universe is such a unique and clever idea. It kind of expands the world a little bit more naturally, and it's honestly kind of wild how iconic the Stab logo feels alongside the Scream logo. Like, if you know Scream, you also know Stab. So it's like they created two memorable and iconic franchises all within itself, which is so cool. And specifically with Scream 2, it's so interesting how they made this the next year. They really struck while the iron is hot. And I like that we follow our characters exactly a year after the Woodsboro murders. I love that the sequel immediately shows consequences from that very first film. Seeing Sydney a year later, clearly more hardened, more traumatized, kind of feels like the movie and the events of the first one actually matter, and it's not just this retread or this reset with this sequel. And I think having the opening in a movie theater at the Stab premiere, and then also having the Ghostface killer return and murder someone at that Stab premiere is again a really interesting way of kind of commenting within its own fandom and satirizing its own franchise. I think it helps make Sydney's return to the franchise and back into the spotlight feel like a really great way to kind of escalate things, and it feels organic, especially because we're following this copycat style of killer. I also think introducing Cotton Weary back into the mix, even though he was a pivotal part in that first movie, he really had, 2 seconds of screen time on a news channel in the background of a TV. So I love that he is not a main character here, but his presence is steadily throughout the film. He's tied directly to Sydney, her trauma, and becomes this really strong red herring character that adds tension without undoing anything anything that was set up or resolved in that first Scream movie. And I think not only on top of that, adding to the Scream universe, but then also to Sydney, it kind of gives Gail the perfect excuse to kind of return into the mix because, of course, she's going to chase a story that is similar to what she just experienced. And now the guy that she helped get out of prison is kind of up in the mix as well. So I love the organic, natural feeling of getting all these characters back together so quickly. I think Kevin Williamson does another fantastic job with this script. Overall, we'll get into some of my issues, but I think overall the writing is still sharp and clever. It's clearly made by a team that just loves movies, and you can tell that by many scenes throughout the movie. For example, that film class scene where all the students there are debating sequels and whether movies influence real-world violence is not only classic Scream, but it's also relevant and strong topics that are still being discussed today. So in a way, it was almost kind of ahead of its time while also being right on the money with its time as well. And even though the structure, kind of the initial setup and the way the movie plays out feels a little familiar, it somehow in a way makes me feel even more sympathetic for the character of Sydney. Watching her repeatedly just get pulled back to the worst events of her life really make this nightmarish scenario for Sydney make me feel so emotionally attached to her and her situation. And just like every Scream movie, I haven't rewatched the entire franchise, but from what I can remember, this one continues on that positive trend of making everybody feel like a suspect here. The similar group dynamic from the first movie kind of, at least for me, had me second guessing who could be the killer the very first time I was watching it. And I remember looking back the first time I watched it, I genuinely had no idea who the killer could be. I kept overthinking whether they would repeat the boyfriend or one of the friend plot lines or subvert it or change it just to kind of mess with the audience. So I like that you kind of get a similar group dynamic here because it makes you think they're going to do the same thing, but then you're like, they can't possibly do the same thing, but that'd be kind of genius maybe if they do it and pull it off. So there's never a clear-cut answer, even though there's tons and tons of red herrings. And I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I'm so sad that they killed Randy in this movie. Right up there with Sydney and Dewey, Randy is a huge standout in these first two movies. One of my favorite characters in the franchise, and I think he's just the king of the meta commentary that these movies provide and really gives that audience perspective. His scenes, especially the diner conversation he has with Dewey about sequel rules and who could be suspects and who they both think are the killer, is everything you want to go to a Scream movie for, and Randy just always provides some of the biggest laughs to me, at least in these first two movies here. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of them killing him off, I think it is ballsy. It's a big move to do, and it really shocked me the first time that they did it. And I just love the scene that it's a part of. I think it's so funny when Ghostface calls Randy in the middle of this park and starts giving him shit for not being the main character and that he's never going to be the lead in this franchise. And Randy just gets so upset, screaming "fuck you" into the phone. And the way he just kind of screams that in his nerdy, angry way makes me laugh every single time. And
why are you even here, Randy? You'll never be the leading man. Fuck you!
He just gets taken out mid-rant. So I wish Randy maybe stayed around a little bit longer, but again, similar to what the opening did in the first one, it really elevates the tension here, making you think that none of our main characters could be safe. But let's jump into the mix section for the movie. And this one is definitely such a nitpick for me, and I understand what they're going for with Sydney's new boyfriend, Derek. Just for some reason, he kind of comes off as goofy to me, and I've never really bought into that relationship the couple times I've seen this movie. And especially with the cafeteria singing scene, it's heartfelt. I imagine it looked better on paper, but in execution, I really can't think of another scene that makes me personally cringe every time.
And you walked into the room. I think I love you.
Don't do this.
I think I love
It feels like I'm watching High School Musical at that point and really pulls me out of the movie. I don't know if it's with how he's singing or just me not being the biggest fan of his character. Just I hate that scene, and I hope I'm not the only one.
have to worry. I only want to make you happy. And if you say, hey, go away, I will.
I think the soundproofing studio chase scene with Ghostface, Gale, and Dewey is incredibly tense. It's a creative environment to kind of throw our characters in, especially with how they kind of use sound in that scene. But with that being said, I think faking Dewey's death again right after they did the same thing in the first movie just feels so repetitive, unearned, and so much less impactful. And I do like how this movie acknowledges that sequels, especially in horror franchises, will kind of up the gore. And you do get a bit of added gore, blood, and violence in this movie, but I just wish they went more with it, or at least some more creative kills, because it still feels like a very watered down R-rated movie. But I think a good example of how they try to outdo it a little bit is that really cool cop car chase scene with Ghostface driving the car with Sydney and her friend in the back seat, and then driving into this construction site with one of the cops on the roof of the car, and he gets his face blasted in by a bunch of metal poles. Like, I wish there was more of that creative, outlandish, but not afraid to be kind of gory and over the top. But that car crash scene is also in my mixed here because the scene frustrates me and leaves me feeling frustrated every single time. Ghostface, as soon as he crashes the car, he is knocked out cold, and neither Sydney or her friend there ever really try to unmask him or kill him or tie him up in any way. I mean, Sydney goes for the mask for a second, but then blasts the horn real quick and then gets spooked and they get out of the car, but that just further proves how knocked out cold he is, and it's frustrating because it's like right there. Like, just unmask him, especially when they're both out of the car. And then Sydney goes back to try and do what she should have done a couple minutes ago. But then Ghostface is, of course, gone and then somehow gets behind them. I think that scene kind of breaks the logic of, okay, these are supposed to be humans. They're not superhumans. So how did neither Sydney or her friend hear him getting up or getting out of the car, walking around there like they're moving with no logic? So just little scenes like that kind of ruined a very tense scene for me, if that makes sense. But let's jump into my negatives, or the things that I just didn't really like about this movie. And I know some of my negative points are going to sound contradicting, but just hear me out for a second, because I am not as big on Scream 2 as it seems like most people. I still appreciate it and love moments of it, but never fully was one of my favorites. While I appreciate how hard it spoofs sequels and franchises, especially with its setup and group dynamic here, it sometimes makes the movie feel too similar to the original, which I get is what they're going for, but it almost feels like a remix of some sort instead of an actual progression. The final moments kind of highlight that repetition feeling I always get from this movie, ending nearly in the same way as the first one, with a pan out zoom shot of Sydney walking away from the crime scene that just took place in our third act. So it's just frustrating. Like, I get why they're doing it, but to me, I feel like I can never get over that hump of feeling like I'm just watching the first one again. And I think it could have been saved by the killer reveals, and maybe this should have been in my mix, but I'm sticking it with my negatives here because I think it's half great and then also half very disappointing. Billy Loomis's mother being revealed as one of the killers, I think is such a strong, simple twist that has effective and simple motivation behind it, because Billy's mother has so much revenge and anger towards Sydney for killing her son in the first movie, but then also the Prescott family for essentially tearing their family apart. So I think that psychotic revenge angle that shows you maybe why Billy was the way that he is, but instead we're seeing it through his mother, makes a lot of sense. And if they stopped here, I feel like this movie would work significantly more for me, because Mickey, on the other hand, completely loses me in this third act. His over-the-top performance as soon as he is revealed feels so forced. His motivation is so weak, and his sudden performance and shift into acting like a Stu and Billy imitation Timu version just kind of takes me out of the movie. The idea that Billy's mom just found him online as one of the up-and-coming serial killers is so just kind of lame, and emotionally he adds nothing to the story and nothing to the third act reveal, because he never really feels that close with Sydney's new boyfriend Derek and never feels close to Sydney in any way. So it just kind of felt like nothing to me, especially on this rewatch. Like I said, I think the movie would have been stronger if Billy's mom was the sole killer, letting audiences expect a second killer and kind of being misdirected the whole movie just to find out there really is just one. Because of that, because of the reveals, the repetitive kind of nature, Scream 2 is one of those entries that I appreciate, but is probably my least watched sequel in the franchise, because overall, Scream 2 is a smart, self-aware sequel that expands the meta commentary in interesting ways, really expands Sydney as a character, and proves the original story has lasting impact. However, its repetitive feeling of the first film's structure and a few frustrating creative decisions in the third act with the killer reveals really keep this movie from standing on its own for me. So I think for my rating for this movie is slightly complicated, where again, I think it's a good movie, but I'm just never in the mood to really rewatch this one. So I think I'm going to put it as a higher end of worth your money to rent it if it's $2, $3, $4, $5, but definitely worth your time if you could find it, or if it's even available on a streaming service you're paying for. If you've never seen it, you might like it more than me, you might hate it more, but I think it's worth at least a couple bucks renting, or if it's already on a streaming device you are already paying for. So that's about it. Here you have my thoughts and feelings on Scream 2. Please let me know down below if you fully agree with me. I've heard some people like this more than the first one. If you're one of those people, please let me know exactly why. I'd love to hear different thoughts and opinions on this franchise, but specifically with Scream 2 here. But that's about it. I appreciate anybody watching my videos, so thank you so much. And yeah, look forward to more ZakIsCinema coming very soon.